video series of Client-Side Object Model 101. In this video, we would like to look into the SharePoint Client-Side Object Model. Mainly, we are looking into authentication, passing the username and password, and security. We start by quick review with the integrated Windows authentication. Then we go through passing the username and password to SharePoint with the code. And then we would like to pass the username and password to SharePoint, but this time we want to try it on Office 365. So basically, we want to have a Windows application that interacts with SharePoint on Office 365. Let's start with integrated Windows authentication. By default, client context object inherits the process credentials. Basically, it means that when I'm running a Windows application, the client context object gets the username and password that I use to run that application with. So basically, it's using my Windows username and password. It's going to be different if I want to use the client-side object model on a server-side code or, for example, in an ASP.NET application. But the important point about this is that this method of authentication requires that your client application is exactly in the same domain that your SharePoint is. I don't want to get into the details of this. It's quite obvious. So basically, you don't need to do anything. You just write your code and leave the rest to the client or context object. Now, passing the username and password to SharePoint with code is one extra step. Client context object has a property called credentials. It's basically nothing more than just a simple network credentials. So basically, you create an instance of the network credentials and load it with username and password and pass it to client context. So basically, your code looks like this. We create our client context object with the URL, and then we set the credentials property of this client context object to a new instance of network credentials, passing the username and password. Let's see how it works. I go to Visual Studio. I create a new project. It's going to be a Windows application, and I call it CSOM 101 Part 4. Just like before, I add references, and the references are going to be SharePoint.client.dll and SharePoint.client.runtime.dll, and I click OK. And I would like to add a button, and I call it Get Web Title. Now, if I double click on it, I'm in the code, and I can make a reference using Microsoft.SharePoint.client. As you may remember, when I add the Microsoft.SharePoint.client, I have ambiguity in the form. Again, I would say it's system.forms.form, and I go back to my code. So using client context, CTX equals new client context, and I need a URL. Now for the URL of the SharePoint site, I'm using this URL. The URL that I'm using is a website that I created, but the current user doesn't have access to it. So if I try to open this URL using Internet Explorer, it shows me the error that I don't have access. So same thing happens if I want to run it and I pass this URL and run it without really passing the username and password. So I would say my web equals ctx.web, and then I would say ctx.load, and I want to load my web. Now I want to be specific about the properties that I retrieve from the SharePoint site. So I would say w.title, and then ctx.execute query, and then message box.show my web.title. So I expect an error because my current user, which is Ali Razad, doesn't have access to this website. Let's give it a try. I run it, and I click on get web title, and I get the error 401 unauthorized. Now if I pass the credentials, it's going to be a little bit different. So for this, I would say ctx dot credentials equals new system dot net dot network credential, and I pass the username and password. My username for this is user1. It has backslash, so I got to start it with that sign, and the password is this password. If I run it this time and I say get web title, it's going to show me the secure one, which is the title of this website. Imagine we want to run the same code on Office 365. So on Office 365, it's a little bit different. On Office 365, we have an object called SharePoint Online Credentials instead of network credentials. And SharePoint Online Credentials uses the secure string instead of just a simple string for the password to protect the password during the transfer over the network. Let's see how it works. So we have the username, the password, but the SharePoint Online Credentials doesn't accept the password as a string. Instead, it accepts secure string. So we create an instance of the secure string object, then we navigate through all the characters in the password, and we pass them one by one, and we add them to the secure password object. Now we can create the credentials just like this. So SharePoint Online Credentials, and then we pass the username and the secure password of type secure string to it. The rest is going to be exactly the way it was before. Let's see how it works. Okay, I get back to my form and I create another button here. I would say get web title, and I call it 365. So I take exactly the same code, I paste it here, but instead of this URL, I put the URL of my website from Office 365. So I go to this website, and here's my URL. Before we move forward, let's examine this URL. So I just take a copy of it and I open it in the browser. Here's the URL, and I'm using the David Smith, so the title that I'm looking for is CSOM 101. I get back to the code, and inside the code we start by creating the username. So let's start string username equals so the username is going to be David. Paste it here. String password is going to be same password that I used before. Now I need a secure string, so I go to the system.security.secureString, call it secure pass, for example, new secure string. Now I go through a for each loop, and I would say character ch in password dot to char array, and here it's going to be secure pass dot append character the ch on every loop iteration. Now all we need to do is SharePoint Online Credentials equals new SharePoint Online Credential. So the username is going to be username variable, and the password is going to be secure pass this time. I created my credentials, so all I need to do is ctx dot credentials equals credentials that I just created here. Let's see if it works. Let me run it. I click on Get Web Title 365, CSOM 101, which is exactly the same title that I have here. It's October. In Ontario, October is mainly the season for duck and goose hunting and salmon fishing. So I'm spending more time by the river or on the lake and less time producing videos. I'll be a bit slower, but I'll keep on doing it. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.